a photo ripped apart before it ever existed. Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Ombra. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. I always love seeing this community connect. Your voices bring these mysteries alive. Now, let's begin. You can judge a day by its first knock at the door. A friendly tap-tap means a bill or a salesman. A nervous ding-dong is a client who left his backbone in a previous coat. And a single, firm press of the button, no apology, no fidget, usually means trouble that has already borrowed money in your name. At 10:41 on a Wednesday that was trying to be spring, the bell at West 35th Street delivered the third kind. I was in the office finishing a letter to a client who had discovered that a locked drawer will not keep a determined nephew from a stamp collection when the chime put on its good suit. Fritz was clattering something cheerful in the kitchen that made the brownstone smell like honesty. Butter, onions, and a plan. Wolfe was upstairs communing with orchids, a ritual that occupied him from 9 to 11 and brooked interruption only if the building were on fire and the fire department had brought poor quality hose. I opened the door to a woman who was either composed or had practiced the look until she could charge for it. She was tall enough to meet me straight on, with a well-measured face that had been taught not to tell secrets and wasn't planning to start. The hat she wore belonged to a category that costs more than rent and announces it, black with a narrow band, precise enough to be used for drawing straight lines. She held a square parcel wrapped in brown paper and twine, and if the parcel had been a baby, it would have grown up to become evidence. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, "is upstairs cultivating his higher nature," I told her. "I'm the lower one. Archie Goodwin." "You're expected?" "No," she said, "but I am inevitable." She had the kind of voice that made ordinary words sound like she had edited them first. I ushered her in, took the parcel like it might preen, and moved her to one of the yellow chairs in Wolfe's office. She sat without looking like she sat, which is a trick I haven't mastered, and set the parcel on her knees. "Name?" I asked. "Evelyn Larkin," she said. "I'm counsel to the Midtown Museum of Art and Applied Memory." "Applied memory," I repeated. "Is that what you people do with the exhibits?" "Apply it to who?" "To the donors," she said. No smile. "I require Mr. Wolfe's services for precisely 6 hours, beginning at 12:30 today. In that time, I ask that he perform no action. He is to remain in his home and decline any requests to admit new visitors to this room, save those already within." I sat back far enough to get the angle on that. "You want to hire Mr. Wolfe to do nothing?" "Yes. Lady, he's a prodigy, but 6 hours is a heavy lift." She didn't flinch. "My instructions are inside this package. They are to be opened only by Mr. Wolfe at precisely noon. Under no circumstances is anyone to open them before that time. I am authorized to deposit $10,000 now, with an additional 15 upon completion." I weighed the parcel. It wasn't heavy, but the numbers were. I glanced at the wall clock. 10:46. Wolfe had 14 minutes of orchids left and then 17 minutes to descend like a slow avalanche and claim his chair. "Before we get excited," I said, "I should warn you that Mr. Wolfe would sooner perform a gavotte on the sidewalk in February than accept instructions he can't examine. He also hates being told what to do in his own house, hates doing nothing when paid to, and hates most of all having to hate more than one thing at a time. So you know what you're up against." "Mr. Goodwin," she said, "you have a reputation for embroidery. Please confine yourself to the hem." She set her handbag on the arm of the chair. It was a solid piece of leather with hardware that could anchor a small boat. "I need Mr. Wolfe to agree now, before he reads the instructions, or he cannot help me." "That's a neat paradox," I said. "You want him to commit to service without knowing the service, because the service is dependent on ignorance of the service." "Correct." "And the money?" "In certified check, which I brought. The board authorized me at 9 this morning. It was not a pleasant conversation." You've had a lot of practice being unpleasant, I suggested. She gave me the look people give when they know they hired the right firm and don't like that they know it. Mr. Wolfe is a man of precision. He will recognize the necessity. Don't bet your donor plaque, I said and stood. You can wait here. If you hear a crash, that's only him coming down the stairs faster than nature intended because you used the word necessity about his behavior. It's an irritant. She sat, parcel parked, eyes on the closed door that led to the hall, as if watching a curtain. I took the parcel to my desk and set it there where the sunlight could worry the twine, and then I did something I wasn't going to confess to anybody in a uniform. I leaned closer and put an air to the brown paper the way you do with seashells if you like being disappointed. No ticking, no prayer. The twine was ordinary, the knot a square knot that had read the manual. At 11 sharp, the upstairs door opened. Footsteps registered on the stairs like a legal argument, each one separate, deliberate, and getting to a point you won't like but can't refute. Nero Wolfe arrived with his standard equipment, bulk, brown-yellow eyes that had read more books than I've stamped with dates, and a disposition set by orchids, which is to say, superior. He crossed the office with his usual lack of concession to speed, planted himself in the red leather, and made the chair decide to support him. He looked at the woman. He looked at the parcel. He looked at me. These are verbs with him. I did the honors. Miss Evelyn Larkin, Midtown Museum of Art and Applied Memory, Counsel. She wants to hire you to do nothing for 6 hours, starting at 12:30. The job comes with a package of instructions you may not open until noon, a certified check for $10,000 immediately, and a promise of 15 more if you accomplish the miracle of inactivity in your own house. Wolfe closed his eyes. He opened them. If you've never seen that with him, it's like a curtain you didn't know was there being drawn and redrawn, and when it goes up again, the set has changed. Pfui, he said. Miss Larkin said, Mr. Wolfe, the nature of my problem forbids disclosure until a particular time. All I can say is that something will be attempted. Here, your presence, your immobility, and your authority will prevent it. Wolfe flexed his fingers once on the chair arms, a movement that meant his mind was already marching around in cultivated squares. Madame, my presence I can guarantee. I am here. My immobility is not a product for hire, but a condition of existence. My authority extends only so far as the threshold in my temper. Your proposal addresses neither my intelligence nor my appetite, and I am disinclined to accept restraints in my own office. Why should I enter into this apparatus? Because, she said, and now her composure loosened half an inch, the Midtown Museum will be ruined if you do not, and because the person attempting the thing knows your habits well enough to have chosen the one place in New York where success would also be humiliation. Well, Wolfe murmured, hubris on my carpet. She reached into the handbag and produced an envelope thick enough to qualify for voter registration and a narrow rectangle with a notarized face. She set them on the edge of Wolfe's desk with the kind of care you reserve for objects or people you plan to blame later. The check and a power of attorney limited to the next 24 hours, authorizing you to act for the museum in any matter touching this attempt. Wolfe looked at the power of attorney as if it were a dish of calves' brains that had come on the wrong day. Confound it, Miss Larkin. You invite me to accept constraint without context. You invite yourself to participate in dignity, she said. Yours. I hadn't seen many people throw the word at him like that and not duck. Wolfe's eyes narrowed until they were almost comfortable. He wobbled a finger at the parcel on my desk. The instructions. Not to be opened until noon, she said. If you open them earlier, the plan, our plan, fails. And yours succeeds? Wolfe asked mildly. Perhaps, but not as cleanly. He leaned back, making the leather voice its opinion. Archie. Here, I said. Fritz. I went to the hall and sang out. Fritz came, with a towel over his shoulder and the question of lunch on his face. Wolfe told him to prepare something that would not offend at 1 o'clock because we might have a guest or a siege, and then turned back to Miss Larkin. "You will stay," he said. "The sum is accepted. The power is not, for now. The instructions will remain unopened until noon. At noon I will open them and may yet throw you out, but I shall have at least vented my curiosity. In the meantime, you will inform Mr. Goodwin of all names and connections that bear on this enterprise, or I will waste no ink on it." Miss Larkin exhaled, which in her count was almost a collapse. She set her handbag back on the arm, slipped off her gloves with unathletic efficiency, and said, "All right, but some of it will seem insufficient." "Everything is insufficient," Wolfe said, "until it is enough." "Proceed." She did. 3 weeks ago, the museum announced an exhibition called The City as It Remembers Itself, a collection of photographs, maps, diaries, and objects documenting New York's unofficial history. The central piece is a photograph taken in 1975 at the corner of 10th Avenue and 24th Street, of a community vigil. It has never been exhibited publicly. The donor, a private collector with delicate sensibilities and a depraved lawyer, conditioned the gift on security terms that would make Fort Knox seem sociable. Yesterday afternoon we received a message, no signature, stating that a photograph would be made today at 2 o'clock in this room, purporting to show our director, Mr. Howard Marvel, accepting cash in exchange for altering a loan agreement. The message said that if we did not cancel the exhibition, that photograph would be circulated to the press by 5. I made a note and lifted an eyebrow. Blackmail with a future tense. Yes. And this room, named specifically. "You could have gone to Kramer," I said. "He'd enjoy documenting any future crimes we might commit." "We cannot afford the noise," she said, "and the sender knows it." Wolfe lifted a hand. "Why this room?" "Because," she said, "Mr. Marvel is scheduled to attend a luncheon nearby and would, as a matter of course, stop here to consult." She had the decency not to look at the shelves. "Your association with certain board members has been noticed. The sender's plan hinges on an implied endorsement that you, Mr. Wolfe, were in some way aware of, or tolerating, the scene." "If I am to be used as a prop," Wolfe said, "I prefer the role of marble bust." Miss Larkin nodded at the parcel. "The instructions describe how we propose to prevent the photograph from being made. But the message warned that if we interfere, if anyone besides me and our security advisor knows the details, the attempt will move to a secondary location and the consequences will widen." I looked at the parcel, then at Wolfe. Wolfe looked at the clock. He does not enjoy clocks unless they announce meals or the end of people who irritate him. It said 11:19. "Names?" Wolfe said. "Howard Marvel, our director. Adele Voss, Deputy Director and Chief of Development. She raises money and beliefs. Franklin Sill, Curator of Photography, which means he thinks in negatives. Neil Ordway, outside counsel who believes he's inside. Mr. Ernest Day, our security advisor. His parents had a sense of humor, who will arrive at 12:15 if you accept and will wait at the corner until called. And the donor's representative, a Ms. Quinn, who exists in law, but less in life. There are others, but those are the ones who matter." And the message? Typed, no return address, delivered by a messenger who didn't ask questions because he didn't have room. We have it. I did not bring it. "Why not?" I asked. "Because," she said, "whoever is behind this knows what we touch as well as where we sit." "That's cheerful," I said. "Do they know what I think?" "I hope not," she said. "It would be a short book." Wolfe's eyes went to the parcel again, not hungrily. He rarely looks at anything that way, but with the irritation of a man confronted with an unshelled nut at a formal dinner. "You understand, Miss Larkin, that this is an affront. That you selected my office is an insolence that I am tempted to answer with the police, if only to still your museum's dramatics." "I understand," she said. "That's why I came myself with money and humility, and why I ask you to do nothing until you can do something with maximum effect." My notebook had collected the names, the times, and a small sketch of the parcel just to annoy myself later. Outside, a truck coughed curves into the air. Upstairs, a hum I associate with orchids and Wagner drifted down like a warning about fate. I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Suppose," I said, "we play along. At noon, we open the sacred box, and the sacred script instructs us to turn off the lights and sing a hymn while a man with a camera slips on a banana peel. Suppose it's cleverer than that, and the real scheme is to get something into this room an hour early, or out of it. Suppose the photograph doesn't need Mr. Marvel to be Mr. Marvel. It only needs his silhouette and your panic. Suppose—" "Archie," Wolfe said. I shut up. He hates it when my suppositions crowd the furniture. "We proceed," Wolfe said. "Miss Larkin will remain. Mr. Goodwin, you will telephone Mr. Marvel and invite him for 1:30, on a pretext, say an inquiry about his board's appetite for sponsoring a monograph on men who send notes in the imperative mood. He will come. He cannot resist the opportunity to be smug in front of me. Also, call Mr. Saul Panzer. Tell him to hold himself ready. I do not care for this odor." He inhaled, and it wasn't Fritz's onions he meant. "We will open the parcel at noon. Until then, we will do nothing, which is, for once, what we are paid to do." Miss Larkin didn't relax. Not exactly. But something eased behind her eyes. A room unlocked. She reached for the certified check as if reminding it who owned whom, and set it closer to Wolfe's blotter. "You're accepting?" she asked. "Madam," Wolfe said, "I'm accepting an opportunity to protect my house from being made an instrument in a charade and to gratify my curiosity as to the mechanism by which anyone supposes they can arrange a photograph that is to be taken in a place where I am. The fee is immaterial." That wasn't strictly true, or even crookedly, but I let it pass. $10,000 is not immaterial. It buys wine that makes Fritz hum in new keys. I called Mr. Marvel and got his secretary, who had been trained to level her voice at the precise altitude where enthusiasm gets altitude sickness. She informed me that the director's lunch at the Palisade Club would conclude at 1:15, and that he never interrupted lunch unless he could get 2 scenes for the price of 1. I told her to pencil him in for 1:30 for a matter of delicate interest to the board, and her tone brightened enough to grow a plant. She promised to pass the message in a way that suggested she'd do it and take credit later. Then I called Saul Panzer and said, "Saul, hello. A museum wants to hire us to do nothing. Naturally, this requires your talent. Can you be within 2 blocks of the brownstone at noon?" "I can," he said. Saul is economy. "And can you bring an eye for anything that pretends to be something it isn't, including but not limited to cameras, microphones, men who don't itch when they ought to, and women who know the word apparatus?" "I will," he said, and hung up to get to work, which is why Saul is the relief pitcher you dream of. By the time I turned back, Wolfe had closed his eyes again, as if trying to force them into agreement with his stomach, which was a counseling lunch. Miss Larkin kept her gaze on the parcel like it owed her rent. At 11:52, Fritz came to the door and announced that a consommé capable of reconciling enemies was ready, with bread that would make them friends again. Wolfe permitted the tray and the bowls to invade and arranged his spoon's angle with a precision that made Miss Larkin's hat feel welcome. We ate in silence, which with us counts as foreplay to the main argument. The clock marched to 11:59 with a determination I could respect, even if I didn't like its politics. At noon, Wolfe opened his eyes and leaned forward. He did not ask permission. He extended a hand, and I brought the parcel. He inspected the knot, the twine, the paper, and then employed a paper knife with a sensuality he reserves for printed matter. The paper peeled back with a dry whisper, and he lifted the lid from a box that had been a box its whole life and knew it. Inside was another envelope sealed with red wax and a note on top in a clean, even hand. Open only when the clock in this room shows precisely 12. Read aloud. Wolfe looked at the clock, which had decided on 2 minutes past, and made a noise that has made more clocks mind their manners than not. He turned to me. "Archie." "Yes, sir," I said. "Set the second hand where the letter wants it." I adjusted it to noon because in our house time is what Wolfe says it is, and he broke the seal. He lifted the sheet, adjusted his glasses on his nose and read, his voice even and, if I'm not sentimental, cold. "Mr. Wolfe, at 2 o'clock, a man will attempt to make a photograph in your office. He will fail if 2 things occur. First, that you, only you, remain seated and silent. And second, that Mr. Goodwin obey your instructions exactly. Do not call the police before 2:15. Do not search your office. It has already been searched. Do not admit Mr. Day until 12:55. Do not let Mr. Marvel stand anywhere near your desk. If you follow these instructions, you will prevent the photograph that will ruin us and be used to dishonor you. Eel." Wolfe lowered the sheet. Miss Larkin's hands were flat on her knees with the attitude of being stapled there. I looked at the clock because I needed to look at something that didn't look back. "It has already been searched," Wolfe repeated, and his voice had a thickness to it that meant our house had been touched. He let the sheet settle on the blotter like a feather learning gravity and turned his head an inch to me. "Archie." "Yes," I said. "Before we are done," he said, "someone will apologize to this room." He closed his eyes again. Miss Larkin didn't breathe for 3 counts. I did, because I like the habit. The knock that followed at 12:07 was not friendly or nervous. It was a new category. It was polite, like a man who has already decided where to sit and is letting you catch up. The knock at 12:07 was the kind you answer even if you don't like company, because it sounds like the knocker already owns part of the building. I opened it to a man who looked assembled for sale. Grey suit that had studied law, hair parted with a ruler, eyes that had been instructed not to blink in negotiations. He introduced himself with the efficiency of a deed. "Neil Ordway," he said. "Counsel, Midtown Museum." He added nothing, no pleased or sorry to intrude. Men like that leave adjectives at the curb. I let him in because Wolfe had ordered immobility, not celibacy. He came into the office like he was inspecting it for tax liability. Evelyn Larkin didn't flinch. She said, "Neil, I told you not until after 1. "I was nearby," he said. He placed his hat on the edge of my desk as if it were a deposition and looked at the parcel's remains. "You've opened it." "At noon," Wolfe said, and his voice was enough to remind anyone who owned the air rights in this room. Ordway turned toward Wolfe, assessed the bulk in the chair, and adjusted his stance as if trying to make his own shoes more expensive. "You'll find," Ordway said, "that the museum board considers your cooperation essential. This matter." Wolfe lifted a palm the size of an atlas. "Mr. Ordway, spare me the board. I care nothing for your quorum or its posture. You are here uninvited, and I am already more than adequately burdened by your colleagues' stipulations. Sit if you must." Ordway didn't sit. He stood, hands linked behind his back, the posture of a man who thinks he can command a room by giving it less chair than it expects. I stayed leaning against my desk, arms folded, which has the advantage of both posture and potential. Miss Larkin cut in. "Neil, I retained Mr. Wolfe on my authority as counsel. The board doesn't need to bless it, and you don't need to hover. If you doubt me, you'll find the power of attorney on his desk." That was her mistake. Wolfe's eyes flicked toward her, slow, irritated, and then to the envelope of authority she'd laid out. "Indeed," he murmured. So you trust me with power, but not with foreknowledge. Ordway caught that and narrowed his eyes. Then you haven't told him everything? I've told him what was necessary, she said flatly. Wolfe's brow furrowed, a rare movement. Miss Larkin, necessary is a term elastic enough to stretch around a lie. You will regret attempting it here. Before the air could thicken any further, the phone rang. I picked it up, listened, and reported, Saul Panzer, he's on the block. Nothing unusual yet, but a man in a delivery uniform has crossed the street twice without carrying anything. Wolfe grunted. Keep him in sight, he told me. I passed it along to Saul, who answered with his usual two-syllable economy and hung up. When I put the phone down, Ordway was glaring at Miss Larkin, and Miss Larkin was staring at the carpet as if deciding whether to confess to it. Wolfe leaned back, eyes closed, lips pressed tight. At 12:20, the silence broke again. A faint scrape, almost polite, from the rear corridor. Fritz would have no reason to be there just now, which meant someone else did. I moved quickly, reached the hall, and caught the back door latch trembling, like a man had tried it, found it locked, and reconsidered burglary. I yanked the door open, but saw nothing except air that was moving faster than it should. When I returned, Wolfe's eyes were open. Report. Somebody probed the back door, I said. Light touch, no entry. If it was our photographer, he's rehearsing. Wolfe's gaze shifted to Larkin. Madame, it seems the rehearsal has begun early, and your instructions forbade me from searching my own house, though it has already been searched. What am I to infer? Her composure cracked another inch. That they are already inside. That earned her a glare from Ordway, sharp enough to staple paper. You didn't tell me that. I didn't tell you, she said, voice tightening, because if you'd known, you'd have already called the police, and then the threat would have been carried out elsewhere. We need to contain it here. Wolfe growled deep in his throat. Containment is a word for generals, not counselors. Still, Archie, fetch Mr. Day at 12:55, not a minute earlier. Until then, we will let the mouse run. I want to know where it scurries before we set the trap. That settled the strategy. Wolfe was willing to let someone tiptoe through his brownstone, and that told me one thing. He wasn't after prevention. Not yet. He was after exposure. Whoever had dared touch his sanctum was going to be unmasked, and the punishment would not be delivered by camera. The clock edged to 12:30. Wolfe signaled Fritz for coffee, not because he needed it, but because the ritual was his way of planting a flag. The routine continues no matter who trespasses. Miss Larkin sipped hers with fingers that trembled only once. Ordway declined and paced by the window, muttering about liabilities. I kept watch on the corridor, ears sharp, stomach tight. At 12:42, a small sound cracked the air, a click, faint but distinct, from the bookcase along the north wall. It wasn't the sound of a book being replaced. It was the sound of something mechanical settling into place. Wolfe's head turned fractionally. He didn't rise, didn't shout. He just said, Archie. I crossed the room, crouched by the shelves, and found it. Not a book, but a lens, no bigger than a button, neatly fitted between volumes. It was pointed directly at Wolfe's chair, and it was new. When I looked back, Wolfe's face was stone. Remove nothing, he said. It will be more useful as evidence in place. For now, let it see what it came to see. The reckoning will be later. And with that, the brownstone had been officially disturbed. The lens in the bookcase sat there like a bug pretending to be a pearl, and Wolfe regarded it with a disgust that was heavier than anger. He doesn't flare when violated. He absorbs, like a storm wall. His command had been to leave it, and I obeyed, though it went against the itch in my fingers to twist it out and see who had wired it. Ordway's jaw was working like he'd bitten into a clause he hadn't drafted. That thing wasn't here this morning, he said. No, Wolfe agreed. nor yesterday, nor last week. Which means, Mr. Ordway, that someone has been in this room within hours, and since Miss Larkin assured me of her museum's delicacy, and you have both arrived before the appointed time, I am forced to conclude that your adversary is a friend of yours." Miss Larkin flinched. Ordway opened his mouth, then shut it, and that was as good as an admission to Wolfe. "Archie," Wolfe said, "you will telephone Mr. Panzer again. Tell him to widen his survey. This is not the work of a lone crank. This is prepared, calculated, and placed by one who knows our habits. He is either still inside the house or watching from near enough to know when to trigger his device." I made the call. Saul, in his usual dry timber, reported that our friend in the delivery uniform had now found reason to stand across the street with a rolled newspaper he hadn't opened. Another man, shorter in a camel-hair coat, had arrived 10 minutes earlier and parked himself in a sedan facing the brownstone, pretending to nap. Saul didn't like the symmetry. Neither did I. When I relayed it, Wolfe let his lids lower until only slits of brown showed. So, a watcher and a hand. Not ingenious, but bold. They believe they will have their picture. "Then why wait until 2?" I asked. "Because," Wolfe said, "the photograph requires a scene, and a scene requires actors. Mr. Marvel must arrive to play his part, and perhaps 1 or 2 others. Without them, the charade lacks conviction." Ordway finally broke. "This is lunacy," he snapped. "We should dismantle that device at once, call the police, and end this." Wolfe tilted his head, and the disdain in it could have withered taller men. "Mr. Ordway, do you imagine the police will arrive, carefully preserve your museum's dignity, and spare me from being a prop? No. They will trample my carpets, pore through my books, and blunder into precisely the scene our adversary desires, with their badges as seasoning. We will wait. We will control the stage. Archie, your function is simple. Prevent any man with a camera from leaving this house with his toy intact. The rest I shall manage." Miss Larkin's lips parted, then closed. She seemed ready to object, but Wolfe cut her off with a look so blunt it was almost physical. At 12:55, I fetched Ernest Day from the corner. He was a square man with shoulders like a misplaced wall and a jaw that didn't believe in curvature. His handshake was brief, his eyes restless. When I brought him in, he spotted the lens in the bookcase instantly, his face hardening. "Hell," he muttered, "that's not amateur work. Whoever fitted it had tools and time." "Time," Wolfe said, "is the one thing denied to us. Sit, Mr. Day. You are not to arrive before now. Your presence may serve, but your impulses must be muzzled. You will not remove the device." Day looked at him, then at me, and I gave him a tiny nod. Wolfe's word is law in this jurisdiction. He settled in a chair, though his posture suggested the seat was a poor substitute for action. The office smelled faintly of coffee, tension, and Fritz's onion lunch that had long since cooled. The clock's hands moved toward 1:30 with a deliberation that made the room shrink. Miss Larkin had her gloves back on, as if armor. Ordway had gone silent, calculating legal fallout. Day sat taut, while Wolfe remained a carved monument, eyes closed, lips pursed, as if the room's air offended him. At 1:27, the front bell rang again. 3 even strokes. I opened to Howard Marvel, director of the Midtown Museum, and a man who could have been cast as a financier in a morality play. He was tall, neat, and radiated the smug self-sufficiency of one who believes all art exists to decorate his importance. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, as though greeting a clerk. "Mr. Wolfe, an honor." He stepped into the office and took it in with one sweeping gaze, already at home. He nodded to Larkin and Ordway, but didn't offer a word to either, which said enough about his opinion of subordinates. Wolfe didn't rise, of course, but he did open his eyes. "Mr. Marvel, you were invited to consult on a matter of delicacy. It is precisely that." Marvel smiled, and it was the kind of smile you'd pay to see disappear. He moved toward Wolfe's desk, exactly where the instructions had forbidden him to stand. Day rose, half blocking, but Wolfe rumbled, "Not there. You will seat yourself to the left." Marvel paused, his brows rising. "Oh? Is that a rule in your household?" "It is a rule," Wolfe said, "for those who intend to remain in my household longer than 30 seconds. The silence stretched, then Marvel shrugged and claimed the yellow chair. He crossed his legs, adjusted his cuff, and looked ready to be amused. "Well then," he said, "what crisis has summoned me from lunch?" I glanced at the clock. 1:32. The stage was set, and the curtain about to rise. Somewhere in this house, a man with a camera was preparing to make his picture. Somewhere outside, another was waiting to receive it, and Wolfe, immovable as granite, intended to let them try. Marvel made himself comfortable, or as close to it as a man can when Wolfe is looking at him like he's something that crawled out of the compost heap. He drummed his fingers on the chair arm, waiting for Wolfe to supply an explanation, but Wolfe was in no rush. The big man had the kind of patience that makes hourglasses nervous. Finally, Wolfe said, "Mr. Marvel, there is an attempt being made to dishonor both your institution and my house. A photograph is to be fabricated in this room today at 2 o'clock. Its purpose, to suggest you have accepted money in exchange for altering a loan agreement. The photograph, if made, will be disseminated publicly to ruin you and the museum and to embarrass me. You will remain seated where you are until I instruct otherwise." That landed like a brick on Marvel's smugness. He blinked, then sat back, producing a laugh meant to be derisive but landing closer to nervous. "A photograph? Here? My dear Wolfe, surely this is melodrama. Someone's feeding you fairy tales." "Phooey," Wolfe said. "Do you imagine I tolerate theatrics in this office? Someone has already placed a device in my bookcase, aimed at me. Someone has already probed my back door. Someone is watching the street as we sit. That is not melodrama, Mr. Marvel." "It is effrontery." Ordway cut in, his voice sharp. "Howard, this is why I told Evelyn we should have gone directly to the police." Marvel turned on him, his face souring. "And parade a baseless threat before the press? No, Neil. The museum doesn't survive scandal, even a false one." "Then you admit there's risk," Wolfe said smoothly. "That is progress." "Archie." "Yes, sir." "Stand by the hall. When the hour strikes, you will permit the attempt to bloom but not to seed. We must see what form it takes before we tear it." Day bristled in his chair. "Mr. Wolfe, you can't just sit there and let them set up. That lens is wired to something. It could transmit in real time, or it could be triggered remotely." "It could," Wolfe said. "And if I were a fool, I would yank it now, destroy it, and leave myself with nothing but debris. I'm not a fool. We will let the charlatan act. Then we will reveal him." The room fell into that heavy silence Wolfe cultivates when he wants his authority to grow roots. Fritz tiptoed in with a fresh carafe of coffee, set it down like an offering to a god, and vanished. Wolfe poured himself a cup, sipped, and closed his eyes. If you hadn't known better, you'd have sworn he was napping through a storm. At 1:47, Saul called again. I took the message. The delivery man had slipped into the alley 2 doors down and hadn't come out. The man in the camel coat was still in his car, eyes half shut, but a handkerchief in his lap shifted now and then. Saul's instinct said the handkerchief was less about hygiene and more about concealment. I relayed the news, and Wolfe only said, "Very well, let the curtain rise." The clock's hands crawled toward 2. Marvel shifted in his chair, tugging at his cufflinks. Larkin sat rigid, her gloves clasped tight. Ordway looked like a man already drafting arguments to cover every angle of failure. Day leaned forward, coiled. And Wolfe, immovable, breathed as though the oxygen belonged to him personally. At 2 o'clock precisely, the faintest buzz tickled the room, a mechanism waking. The button lens in the bookcase emitted a nearly invisible glow, the sort you'd miss unless you were staring at it. Then, just as Wolfe had predicted, the back door rattled again. This time, whoever it was didn't bother with subtlety. The latch clicked open. I was at the hall in 3 strides, but Wolfe's voice stopped me cold. "No, Archie. Let him enter." The door creaked, and a man in a plain brown suit stepped into the corridor, carrying a small valise. He moved with the confidence of someone who thought he owned the script. His eyes flicked once toward me, then passed toward Wolfe's office. Without hesitation, he strode in and set the valise on the rug near Wolfe's desk, right where the light from the window fell. He knelt, opened it, and produced a compact camera mounted on a tripod. Smooth as practice, he fixed it to face Wolfe and Marvel, together. The gall of it made my fingers itch for his collar, but Wolfe's hand lifted an inch, commanding restraint. The intruder spoke for the first time, voice low, efficient. "Gentlemen, I'll be quick. Please stay as you are." Marvel jolted. "What the devil is this? Who are you?" "Quiet," the man said, not loudly but with authority. "1 frame. Then I'm gone." Wolfe shifted in his chair, the only movement he'd made since the hour struck. His voice came out like steel wrapped in velvet. "You will have your frame, sir, but understand this. Once it is taken, you will not leave this house as you entered it." The man froze, camera in hand. His eyes darted to me, to Day, then back to Wolfe. For the first time, doubt cracked his calm, and that was when the trap began to close. The intruder's knuckles whitened on the tripod. His voice lost some of its practiced smoothness. "I don't want trouble. I only need 1 picture. You'll all sit still, no harm done." "No harm done?" Wolfe rumbled, opening his eyes fully. "You've invaded my home, placed a device in my shelves, tampered with my door, and presumed to dictate the positions of my guests. Harm, sir, has already been done. The only question is whether you compound it." The man hesitated, then forced a tight smile. "It's nothing personal. Just a job." "That," Wolfe said, "is invariably the refrain of mercenaries." He turned his head toward me. "Archie." That single word was a lever. I moved fast, stepping between the man and his exit. He reacted by fumbling for the camera, as if clutching it could shield him from consequence. Day rose too, bristling like a guard dog who'd been leashed too long. "Stay," Wolfe commanded sharply, and Day froze, torn between instinct and obedience. Wolfe went on, his tone cool as ice water. "You will not seize him yet, Archie. Let him speak. I want his employer's name, not merely his face." The intruder swallowed, eyes darting between us. "Look, I don't know names. They send instructions, cash in envelopes. I'm hired to make a picture, just 1, and then I deliver the negative. That's it." "Where do you deliver it?" I asked. "Drop point, locker at Grand Central. Keys left in a mailbox uptown, always different. I don't ask questions." "You ask none, but you answer some," Wolfe murmured. "Your presence here required foreknowledge. You knew this house, its rooms, its routines. That implies a source close enough to me to be dangerous. Who gave you this address, and who informed you of the seating plan?" The man licked his lips. He didn't answer. Instead, he tried a desperate bluff, snapping the camera upright, angling it hastily toward Wolfe and Marvel. "Don't move. 1 click, and I'm gone." The sound of the shutter was the last thing he managed before Day lunged, too quick for Wolfe's restraint to matter. The tripod went clattering, the camera snapped, sideways, and I stepped in to relieve our guest of both the valise and his dignity. In another moment, he was pinned to the rug, breathing hard, eyes wild. Fool. Wolfe muttered, watching the wreckage with disgust. Now we have fragments instead of evidence. But he didn't look entirely displeased. He gestured to me. Archie, secure his pockets. He's not clever enough to memorize details. There will be paper. I went through the man's suit briskly, finding a folded note in the inner pocket. Typed, plain and smelling faintly of carbon. It read, 2 o'clock. Wolfe's office. Marvel present. Camera trained from bookcase for insurance. Deliver negative within 2 hours. No signature. No address. I handed it to Wolfe. He read it once, lips tightening. Then his eyes rose, heavy and deliberate, to Marvel. So, you, sir, are the indispensable ornament in this tableau. The fraud cannot flourish without your likeness, which makes it essential to determine whether you are victim or accomplice. Marvel shot to his feet, indignant. Accomplice? Are you mad? This entire scheme is designed to destroy me. Perhaps, Wolfe said evenly. Or perhaps it is designed to preserve you by offering an opportunity to feign outrage and emerge cleansed. I reserve judgment. Ordway sputtered, his composure cracking. Mr. Wolfe, this is absurd. Howard has nothing to gain from such a plot. Nothing, Wolfe countered. If the exhibition collapses under scandal, certain rivalries within your institution are conveniently resolved, and whoever planted that lens knew my habits well enough to predict I would not rise from this chair. That is not knowledge acquired on the street. Larkin's voice was low, but it cut the air clean. Wolfe's right. This came from inside. It has to be one of us. The intruder squirmed on the rug, but Day tightened his hold. I crouched and asked him, "Who gave you the typed note? Where did it come from?" He shook his head quickly. "Never met him. Notes are delivered under my door, always in an envelope. Payment in cash, dropped separate." "Convenient," I said, "and cowardly." Wolfe tapped the note against his palm, thinking. "Archie, take our guest to the front room and sit on him. Mr. Day, remain here. Miss Larkin, Mr. Ordway, Mr. Marvel. You will not leave this house until I have answers. Someone among you is attempting sleight of hand at my expense. I do not permit that." Marvel bristled, but Wolfe's tone flattened him into silence. I hauled the man up, none too gently, and marched him out to the front room. He didn't resist. His fight had drained with the camera's fall. Once secured, I came back. The air in the office was thicker now, the kind that builds before thunder. Wolfe sat with the note on the blotter, eyes closed again, as if arranging his pieces on an invisible board. Then, without opening them, he spoke. "Archie, call Mr. Panzer. Tell him to intercept the man in the camel coat. He is the courier, waiting for the negative. If Saul finds him with instructions, our chain lengthens." I went to the phone, already dialing. The game had moved outside as well as in, but Wolfe was building his net one thread at a time, and somewhere in it, the true hand behind this photograph would be caught. Saul answered before the second ring, his voice clipped as always. I told him about the camel coat, the waiting car, and Wolfe's hunch that he was the courier. Saul didn't ask questions. He never does. Just a quiet, "I'll have him," before he cut the line. That meant the outer ring of the net was tightening. When I turned back, Wolfe still hadn't moved. The note lay on his blotter like a declaration, and he sat with his eyes half closed, savoring silence the way other men savor cigars. Marvel was pacing now, short agitated strides that scuffed the rug, while Larkin kept her gaze fixed on the fallen tripod as if afraid it might stand up again. Ordway was working his jaw, glancing between Wolfe and Marvel like a man trying to calculate whose ruin would damage him least. Day hadn't sat down, his broad frame angled toward the door as if daring another intruder to try it. Wolfe's lids lifted just enough to expose the gleam beneath. "Mr. Marvel, I have made no accusation, but I will observe this. The plot required you. If you are innocent, then someone close to you exploits your presence. If you are not, then your feigned indignation is a poor costume. Which is it? Marvel spun on him, his voice sharp with outrage. This is slander. I came here on your invitation. My invitation, Wolfe interrupted, was issued at my behest by Mr. Goodwin under a pretext. The letter sent to your museum made clear that you were to be in this room at 2 o'clock. You obliged, punctually. Too punctually, for a man of your standing who rarely interrupts his lunch. Why? Marvel faltered, then spread his hands in a parody of candor. Because Evelyn asked me. She said it was vital to the museum, and she hinted my reputation was at stake. Would you ignore such a summons? Larkin didn't look at him. Her jaw was rigid. Wolfe's gaze shifted her way. Miss Larkin. She met his eyes with effort. I told him only that you requested a consultation. I didn't mention his reputation. The silence stretched, taut and dangerous. Wolfe's lips curled into the faintest snare. Then either he lies, or you do. I will know which soon enough. Before either could fire back, the telephone rang. I picked it up. Saul's voice was low but steady. Got him. Courier's not going anywhere. He had an envelope on him, plain, no markings. I'll bring it by. Do, I said, and hung up. Wolfe's eyes gleamed. So, the outer thread tightens. In a moment we will have fresh text to examine, perhaps another hint of authorship. Until then, I will ask you all to contain your impulses. This house has been trespassed, my patience even more so. One of you has allied with a charlatan to humiliate both me and your institution. That one will be revealed. Archie. Yes, sir. See that our guest in the front room remains secure. Then fetch chairs for Miss Larkin and Mr. Ordway. If they must stew, let them stew seated. I complied, though neither looked eager for hospitality. Ordway muttered something under his breath that sounded like farce, but he sat. Larkin took the other chair without a word, posture erect, hands tight on her gloves. Marvel refused to sit again, prowling like a lion who's found himself in a cage lined with mirrors. Day shifted, impatient. Wolfe, what about the man we caught? He'll talk sooner if you let me shake him. No, Wolfe said flatly. Noise is never a substitute for information. He has already told us what he knows. Little. He is a pawn. I'm after the hand that moves him. The room fell into that peculiar quiet again, the kind that thickens with anticipation. The clock ticked past 2:10. Wolfe sipped his coffee, unhurried, as if timing itself bent to his will. Every face in the room showed a different strain. Marvel restless, Ordway calculating, Larkin rigid, Day simmering, and Wolfe a monument in flesh, letting the net draw in closer by the minute. The bell rang at 2:15. I went to the door and found Saul Panzer, calm as a man bringing groceries. He handed me a sealed envelope, then nodded once and vanished down the steps. I brought it to Wolfe, who broke the flap with deliberate care. Inside was a second typed note. He read it aloud in that precise cadence of his. Deliver photograph by 4. Failure means copies distributed by alternate channel. No excuses. He let the page fall to the blotter and looked at his guests. So, we now know 2 things. First, the conspiracy has layers. An instigator who designs, a courier who receives, and a pawn who executes. Second, the instigator has a timetable, which means he fears delay. That is to our advantage. His gaze lingered on each face, one after the other. What remains is to strip the mask, and I warn you all, I will. The weight of that promise settled over the room like storm air before a strike. And somewhere beyond the brownstone, the clock was already running toward 4. The silence after Wolfe's pronouncement had a density you could stack bricks on. Marvel finally broke it with a bitter laugh, too sharp to be casual. Strip the mask, is it? Then begin with the obvious. Evelyn drags me here. insists on secrecy, and suddenly there's a camera pointed at my chest. Who benefits, Wolfe? Not me. Larkin's head snapped around. That's outrageous. I came here to protect the museum, and you know it. If I'd wanted you framed, Howard, I wouldn't have chosen Nero Wolfe as the setting. That's suicide. Ordway pounced. Or cunning. Who would suspect the lawyer who hires the one man in New York least likely to be duped? If the picture succeeded, you could claim innocence. Say you tried everything to prevent it. Wolfe lifted a hand, halting the squabble as neatly as if he'd struck a gong. Enough. You are too eager to redirect suspicion. Guilt often cloaks itself in accusation. His eyes fixed on Marvel, heavy-lidded but sharp. You, sir, are not exonerated because you shout, and you, Miss Larkin, are not absolved because you came with a check. I will weigh evidence, not noise. Day shifted, restless. Wolfe, the clock's running. If they mean to distribute copies by 4, shouldn't we bring the police now? No, Wolfe said. The police blunder. I prefer the truth whole, not trampled. They may come later, once I have arranged the pieces. He gestured at me. Archie, bring in the intruder. I fetched him from the front room. He looked smaller now, shoulders slumped, bravado gone. Day guided him back into a chair while I stood guard. Wolfe regarded him with cold curiosity, as if examining an unfamiliar insect. You, Wolfe said, are named. The man hesitated, then sighed. Kessler. First name? Paul? Kessler, you are a pawn. That does not absolve you, but it diminishes your value as quarry. You are hired by note, paid in cash, and instructed by paper. Did you ever see the courier before today? Kessler shook his head. No. First time. And yet, Wolfe continued, you entered my house with the assurance of a man briefed on its layout. You knew this office, the placement of the desk, the presence of Mr. Marvel. That knowledge did not come from the note. From whom did you hear it? Kessler's eyes darted, panicked. I was told the subject would be obvious once I came in. That's all. They said the fat man wouldn't move and the tall one would be there. They said the others would only watch. A ripple moved through the room. Wolfe's nostrils flared. So, they described me, and they knew I would not rise. That is knowledge intimate enough to narrow the field. His gaze swept the guests. Few outside this circle would predict that immobility as certainty. Marvel tried to scoff, but it rang hollow. Ordway muttered, anyone who's read a profile of you could guess. No, Wolfe said with finality. Profiles gossip. Only those with acquaintance know how absolute my refusal is. He tapped the second note on the blotter. The hour advances. Our enemy expects a negative by 4. We shall disappoint him. Better still, ensnare him. Archie. Here. You will accompany Mr. Panzer. Take Kessler's valise, empty of film, and deliver it to the drop as if you were him. Remain until the collector arrives, then return with him or with Saul's testimony if he bolts. This requires tact and vigilance. Always my specialty, I said. Day bristled. And me? You will remain, Wolfe said, as bulwark. Should anyone attempt entry again, you will intercept, but no excess. Understand me. This is not your museum to guard. It is my house. Day subsided, stiffly. Wolfe closed his eyes once more, folding his hands on the armrests. By 4 o'clock, gentlemen and madam, we shall have a visitor unmasked. Until then, you will sit, and you will stew. Your discomfort is incidental to my purpose. The clock ticked, loud in the hush, each second dragging us closer to the hour Wolfe had chosen for revelation. I took Kessler's valise, now lighter than a conscience after confession, and slipped out with the air of a man running an errand, which in a way I was. Saul was parked 2 blocks over, leaning behind the wheel like he had nothing better to do than wait for the price of cucumbers to drop. He didn't waste words, just raised a brow when he saw me. Change of caste, I said. showing him the valise. "Kessler's out. I'm in. Wolfe wants the collector." Saul nodded once. No surprise there, and we moved. The trip to Grand Central was quick enough, traffic leaning in our favor, and by 3:20 we were inside, blending with the crowd. Saul had the key already, courtesy of the courier in camel hair, and he led us to the locker. I slipped the valise inside, locked it, and dropped the key where it was supposed to go, a nondescript mailbox at the edge of the concourse. Then we melted back into the tide of commuters, Saul anchoring one side of the current, me the other. We didn't have to wait long. At 3:46, a woman in a navy coat and hat, trimmed just shy of ostentation, came up the corridor. She moved like she didn't want to be seen moving, too brisk for a shopper, too deliberate for a wanderer. She checked the number on the locker, glanced once around, and turned the key with practiced ease. Out came the valise. She tucked it neatly under her arm and turned for the exit. Saul gave me the briefest signal. I trailed her from behind while he circled wide. We let her out onto 42nd Street, where the crowd thinned enough to close in. Saul stepped up from her left, I from her right. "Nice luggage," I said. "Planning a trip?" Her hand froze on the strap. Up close, she was mid-30s, fine-featured, and carrying the air of someone accustomed to boardrooms, not errands. Her eyes flicked sharp between us, and she masked her nerves quick, but not quick enough. "I don't know you," she said flatly. "That's true," I told her, "but you know the valise, and you're coming with us." She tried to laugh. "Ridiculous. This is mine." Saul plucked it neatly from under her arm, and that finished the denial. She stiffened, looked around for an ally in the street, found none. Then she sighed and muttered, "Damn him," which wasn't a prayer but sounded like one. We escorted her to Saul's car without fuss. She didn't fight. She knew better. By the time we rolled up to West 35th again, the clock was edging toward 4. Inside, the air in Wolfe's office had gone thicker still. Marvel was sweating under his collar, Larkin rigid, Ordway pale, Day restless. Wolfe sat like an idol carved from indifference until he saw who we'd brought. "Ah," he said softly. "Ms. Quinn." Her composure cracked half an inch. "So you do know me?" "Of course," Wolfe said. "The donor's representative, invisible in life, vivid in law. You were always a suspicious absence." "Sit." She did, carefully, smoothing her skirt. Saul handed over the valise, and Wolfe set it on his blotter like a trophy. He didn't open it, just rested his hand on it as if it were already evidence enough. "Ladies and gentlemen," Wolfe said, his voice low and certain, "the circle is nearly closed. This farce of a photograph was engineered not merely to disgrace Mr. Marvel or your museum, but to manipulate its stewardship. By 4 o'clock, we will know whose ambition authored it. And when we do, they will regret using my house as their stage." The clock hands crawled to the hour, and every face in that room turned toward Wolfe, waiting for the blade to fall. The tick of the clock at 4 landed like a cue on a stage. Wolfe adjusted his bulk in the chair, not rising, not leaning, just commanding the air with a faint shift, as if even his breathing declared dominion. He placed the valise squarely on the blotter, his fingers resting atop it. "Ms. Quinn," he said, "you were not surprised when we intercepted you." "Annoyed, yes, but not surprised. That tells me you anticipated risk. What you did not anticipate was that the pawn you employed would blunder in my presence, a miscalculation." She kept her chin up, though her eyes flickered toward Marvel. "You're assuming too much, Mr. Wolfe. I act on behalf of the donor. That's all. I retrieve what belongs to us." "Pfui," Wolfe said, and his lip curled as though the syllable tasted bitter. The donor's conditions were draconian, but not idiotic. No donor would demand a forged photograph of their own director accepting a bribe. That stratagem belongs not to a patron, but to an aspirant. Larkin leaned forward, her voice taut. "An aspirant to what?" Wolfe opened his eyes wider, letting them sweep the room one face at a time. Control. The exhibition, the museum, its prestige. Remove Marvel by scandal, and a vacancy appears. Who profits from such a vacancy? Marvel seized the opening, jabbing a finger toward Ordway. There, the lawyer. He's coveted my seat for years. Ordway sprang up, face red. That's a lie. I never— Sit, Wolfe commanded, and the word landed like a whip. Ordway sank back, rigid, choking down protest. Wolfe went on. Mr. Marvel, your eagerness to deflect is tedious. If you were guilty, you would not need to speak. Your silence would suffice. If you were innocent, your indignation would be more measured. Your agitation incriminates you either way. But let us not wander. The lens in my bookcase, the instructions timed to my habits, the confidence that I would not rise, these point to someone who knows me second-hand, through reputation polished in committee chatter, not through direct acquaintance. Miss Larkin knows me well enough to choose me, but too well to suppose I would cooperate blindly. Mr. Day has no motive but loyalty, and Miss Quinn no authority beyond errands. Mr. Ordway. Wolfe's eyes pinned him. Is clever, ambitious, and always listening. Yet ambition often conceals itself more subtly. This plan required boldness. Too much boldness for a lawyer who thrives on caution. Which leaves us. The pause stretched, and then Wolfe let his gaze settle like a hammer on Marvel. You, sir. Marvel blinked, stunned into silence. Me? He sputtered finally. That's preposterous. Is it? Wolfe's voice was velvet over stone. The photograph, real or forged, would ruin you, unless of course you arranged it yourself to appear the martyr of a conspiracy, to purge dissent on your board, to tighten your grasp on the institution, to emerge cleansed by indignation and indispensable. You needed my house precisely because its sanctity made the plot outrageous, and therefore, once exposed, implausible. Who would believe a man foolish enough to frame himself under Nero Wolfe's roof? That was your shield. Ordway's jaw dropped. Larkin's gloved hands clenched. Day muttered an oath under his breath, and Marvel, red-faced now, struggled for words. You can't prove that, he snapped. You have no evidence. Evidence? Wolfe's voice dropped into lethal calm. You selected the hour, the place, the posture. You ensured you would be summoned here. You fed instructions to a pawn and courier, counting on their failure to strengthen your innocence. But you miscalculated two things. First, that I am not so easily used. Second, that ambition leaves odor. You reek of it. Marvel's fists balled, but he didn't speak. He couldn't. The silence that followed was broken only by the tick of the clock, and in it, his guilt swelled larger than denial ever could. Wolfe turned his head slightly toward me. Archie, call Inspector Kramer. Inform him we have a trespasser, a conspiracy, and a director who believed he could use my house for theater. He may collect them all. That was the signal, the curtain falling on Marvel's performance. And for the first time since he'd entered, the man looked smaller than the chair he sat in. The office smelled of stale nerves and fresh coffee when Inspector Kramer arrived, wearing his usual bulldog expression and a hat that looked like it had been chewed. He took one glance at the tripod on the rug, the valise on Wolfe's desk, and the collection of faces sitting stiff in the yellow chairs, and muttered, Hell, what circus have you pulled me into this time, Wolfe? Wolfe, who hadn't moved so much as an eyebrow since I hung up the phone, merely extended a finger toward Marvel. That man, he said, has presumed to use my house as a stage for his vanity. He arranged to have himself framed in order to appear the victim of intrigue, and thus consolidate his position at the Midtown Museum. He will deny it, of course, but his denial is unconvincing. His plan was fatally flawed the moment it entered this room. Marvel surged to his feet, face red enough to stop traffic. Outrageous. You have no proof. None. This is conjecture, slander. Proof? Wolfe's voice was a rumble of contempt. The proof lies in the design. Only you profited from this charade. Only you possessed the arrogance to suppose I would suffer it quietly. And only you knew you could turn failure into advantage, emerging as the persecuted victim of faceless conspirators. Had the photograph succeeded, you would have cried forgery. Had it failed, as it was always fated to, you would have milked outrage and demanded loyalty. Either way, you intended to emerge stronger, but you neglected one factor. Me. Kramer grunted, eyeing Marvel with growing distaste. Sounds like his kind of stunt, all right. Vain as a peacock when we dealt with him last year. All right, Wolfe, we'll take him in. See how he likes explaining this down at the district. Marvel tried to bluster, but Ordway, pale as a file folder, shifted just enough to edge away from him, and that sealed it. Day clamped a hand on Marvel's arm and steered him toward the door like a package overdue for delivery. Miss Quinn, the courier, followed with a weary resignation that suggested her fee wouldn't be worth the scandal. Kessler slouched in their wake, more pawn than prisoner, but headed for a cell all the same. When the last heel cleared the threshold and Kramer's voice faded down the hall, Wolfe exhaled a long breath and reached for his beer. The case had already moved into history for him, filed under Human Folly, Volume Endless. I leaned on the desk, watching him. So Marvel wanted to be both victim and hero. That's a new stunt, even for the museum crowd. Not new, Wolfe murmured, eyes closed. Merely vulgar. Self-inflicted wounds have been used as proofs of innocence since men first lied. He believed himself clever because he dressed the wound in my house, as if proximity to my name would sanctify his trick. The imbecile. Fritz's discreet cough from the dining room carried a whiff of roast duck and herbs that reminded me of priorities. Dinner, gentlemen. Wolfe levered himself upright with the sigh of a man returning to his proper world. As he moved toward the door, he left one last pronouncement hanging in the air. The appetites of men, Archie, whether for food, for power, or for vanity, are seldom controlled. That is why I'm rarely surprised, only disgusted. I grinned, locking the office behind us. Well, I'll say this. I've had worse afternoons. At least this time we didn't have to hose blood out of the rug. He grunted, which with Wolfe passes for agreement, and by the time we reached the dining room, the case had already shrunk to the size of a footnote. Dinner was served, the brownstone restored its silence, and New York's latest folly passed into Wolfe's ledger, just another entry filed under human weakness. And me? I carved my duck and decided it was better than any photograph, better than any photograph, better than any photograph, better than any photograph, better than any photograph. Better than any photograph, better than any photograph, better than any photograph.